and welcome to Telewizja Republika. We begin tonight with the latest developments from the front lines. Early this morning, Russian forces launched a significant aerial attack on Ukraine, targeting Kyiv and several other regions. The assault involved a combination of cruise missiles, ballistic missiles and attack drones. Ukrainian air defenses successfully intercepted most of the incoming threats, minimizing damage and casualties. However, debris from the intercepted missiles and drones caused fires and damaged various structures in the Kyiv region. In Donetsk Oblast, Russia has deployed a substantial number of assault units from 8 strike brigades, focusing on Pokrovsk and Kharkov sectors. Despite these efforts, Ukrainian forces continue to hold their ground, inflicting significant damage on Russian manpower and equipment. Fighting remains intense near Kilshivka, Kalnivka and Chasiv Yar, with Russian attempts to advance in other regions being largely unsuccessful. Ukrainian forces have also made notable strikes, destroying a Russian Pantsir S-1 missile system in the Luhansk region, reportedly hit by an American HIMARS multiple launch missile systems. Bravo. This attack resulted in the deaths of 2 Russian crew members and serious injuries to another. Additionally, Ukraine successfully targeted several S-300 and S-400 radars in occupied Crimea, causing explosions in multiple towns across the peninsula and in Russia's Krasnodar Krai. These actions have significantly impacted Russian air defense capabilities in the affected areas. On the diplomatic front, President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to meet with US President Joe Biden at the G7 summit in Italy. The leaders will discuss continued support for Ukraine and hold a joint news conference. This meeting underscores the ongoing international backing for Ukraine amidst its conflict with the barbaric state of Putin's Russia. You can join us on rackracon.com, that's our website. You'll find our Substack over there, and you can leave us your emails so that we can be in touch with our reports from the front lines of the ongoing war against the West Coast. That's what we are going to talk about on my show. My name is Michał Rachoń. This is Racon, and we Rollin.
Are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go!
So, no matter if we do have shadow bans on X, Twitters, on our other social media platforms, we do have a great expert, friend of our show, one and only Thomas Theiner. Welcome back, Thomas. Great to see you again. You look great as always. Thomas, we are watching the Russian attack on Ukraine. The war is in its 3rd year. And when we hear news like the ones that we've heard yesterday and today about the Ukrainian propelled fighter training airplane, I even don't know if I can call it a fighter jet, shooting down a Russian drone, actually with a rifle, I wonder, what are we talking about? This is a modern warfare, 21st century. What's your take on those developments?
Well, the Ukrainians understood one thing. Russian drones are flying very slow. And if they're not near the front line where the Russians have air defense systems, you can use any airplane, the oldest even, 50-year-old Yak airplanes, to shoot them down. Because the drones cannot shoot back. And you could fly next to the drone with your plane and with the wing just wiggle a little bit and kick the drone away. So the Ukrainians have figured out that you don't have to use an expensive missile to shoot down a drone. You can do it in different ways. When Iran attacked Israel, the United States were like sending up fighter jets to shoot them down in Jordan. Much, much cheaper than using air defense missiles, which cost $1 million a piece. So the Ukrainians are saving us money by being smart. And the Russians can do nothing because those drones are like toys.
Yeah, deadly toys, and if they are using the old-fashioned 50-year-old constructions, training fighter jets, not jets, fighter planes,
Yeah.
to shoot it down with a rifle, I mean, it's impressive, and this war impresses us in many ways. It's a tragedy, of course. It is a serious war, but things like that makes us think about the creativity on the battlefield as well. But as we are talking about this kind of issues, we are having reports about finally using ATACMS to target, you mentioned the air defense systems, S-300s, S-400s, Russian sophisticated systems are being shot down and destroyed by Ukraine with using the ATACMS missiles. Again, what's your take on those developments, those information?
The ATACMS are used to prepare the battlefield for the arrival of the F-16. Because right now you have Russian air defense systems 50 kilometers close to the border of Ukraine or the front line. And that means those can shoot 150 kilometers into the Ukrainian airspace. So the F-16s have to stay away to not get shot down. So right now the Ukrainians would be confined to use the F-16 within Ukraine, like the Yak, to hunt down drones. And because the F-16 are jet aircraft, they can also shoot down cruise missiles. But they couldn't use them to fight the Russians along the front by bombing them, because the S-300 and S-400 would shoot down the Ukrainian F-16. Now, if all those S-300 and S-400 get hit by ATACMS, the Russians can either see all of their air defense systems destroyed, or the Russians have to move these air defense systems out of range of ATACMS, which means suddenly there's no Russian air defense systems within 200 kilometers of the front line. That means Ukrainian jets can fly in there and bomb the Russians below them directly on the front line with the F-16. That the Ukrainians have been using Patriot also to shoot down the Russian A-50U aerial radar planes is exactly the same reason. If you shoot down the Russian aerial radar planes, the Russians don't see that far into Ukraine, and they cannot guide Russian fighter jets to intercept F-16s. So what the Ukrainians are doing is pushing all Russian air defense assets away with ATACMS and Patriot to make sure the F-16s can fly to the front line and bomb the Russian front line to pieces.
So it looks like the whole process that we are witnessing in a way with the shooting down of the air reconnaissance aircrafts that we discussed a couple of months ago. By the way, do we know what is the exact number of this kind of assets that Russia still has? Because I'm not sure whether we've heard about shooting down 2, 3 of them. I remember that the total amount of those radar aircrafts of Russia was about 10. Did they rebuild part of them? What is the current state of affairs in terms of possessing of this kind of aircraft by Russia?
The thing is that the Russians had about 10 of them, but not all of them are airworthy. The bigger problem is the crews, because you don't have as many crews as planes, because if you have 10 planes, let's say 2 or 3 are always in maintenance. So you have 6 or 7 crews that can fly these planes, and 2 of them are completely dead now, because the Ukrainians shot down 2 of those planes, which means the Russians have maybe 4 or 5 crews left and maybe 5 or 6 planes left. But what nobody is telling you is that the Americans modified the Patriot missiles in a specific way to make them capable of reaching those planes, because those planes were flying out of range of the traditional Patriot missile. And with a little bit of modifications on the seeker and on the engine, the Americans managed to get basically these Russian planes into range and shoot them down.
By following the radar trace of this particular type of aircraft, or by knowing what are the routes that this kind of aircrafts have to fly to control the airspace that they are targeting?
The thing is that the Russians always flew in the same circles, looking at the same distance. So you know exactly from where you have to fire and how far the missile has to go.
Okay.
But what you need is that the Patriot missiles are guided with the radar of the Patriot system towards the target. And that's not within range, but you can modify the seeker so the missile has its own capability to lock onto a target. We're not discussing now what the Americans did to make it lock on specifically on that target, because the Russians shouldn't find out. And so the Russians know now that anytime one of these planes comes within 300 kilometers of the Ukrainian front line, there's a risk of them being shot down. Now, the Russians cannot risk to lose any more of those planes, because if you just have 4 or 5 crews left, so the Russian Air Force is not able any longer to see deep into Ukraine. The Ukrainians have also been striking long-range Russian radars. Those radars that the Russians have to look for the launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles can also be used to look for high-flying enemy planes. And the Ukrainians have been striking those early warning radars in Russia with drones with the exact same intention, to make sure that the Russians do not see the F-16 coming and that the Russians have nothing to intercept the F-16s. So if you're a soldier at the front line of Ukraine, at some point you will experience the beauty of F-16s overhead and start to bomb you like the F-16s bombed the Iraqis in 1991 in the Gulf War.
So it looks, and you mentioned it, so I just wanted to make sure that I understand it properly. So the pieces of this big jigsaw that we are seeing for a long time, with the shooting down of those aircraft, shooting down and destroying the S-300s, S-400s, or all other radar installations, are to invite F-16s safely on the battlefield. Why?
Yes.
What makes those F-16s so important in terms of what they can bomb on the front line, I assume?
Okay, right now initially the Ukrainians only had Soviet airplanes, which means they can drop unguided bombs. Basically, you fly over the target, you angle the airplane so that you look at the target, you release the bomb, and the bomb then hopefully flies on its own towards the target. And if the pilot is not in the right angle, or too slow, or too right to left, the bomb will miss. And then the Ukrainians had to change to this. We saw all the helicopters and the Su-25 fly up, fire rockets, which then fly towards the Russians, unguided, with good luck. Maybe you hit it, maybe you don't. With the F-16s, the Americans already announced that the Ukrainians will get small diameter bombs, which are GPS guided and glide. So basically, the F-16 is over there. It knows it has to hit that garage of that building under that tree. It releases the bomb, and the bomb will exactly hit that building. The Americans adapted already JDAM-ER to Soviet planes, which are good. But the thing is, the JDAMs are huge bombs, cannot carry that many. And since these are Soviet planes, you have to make workarounds to attach them. The F-16, you can slap on, I think, a dozen of small diameter bombs, just fly out there and hit a dozen Russian targets like boom, 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 boom. So more precise, more sorties, more bombs per sortie. Yes, that's why the Ukrainians will start to bomb. I think the Ukrainians will initially not use the F-16s to bomb the Russians at the front line, because you want to first have enough, because 2 F-16 will fly air cover with missiles to try to shoot down Russian fighter jets that intervene. Maybe 1 F-16 will be armed with anti-radiation missile if there's a Russian air defense system to fire harm missiles at the Russian air defense systems. And 2 or 3 you want to use to bomb the Russian front line. So the Ukrainians, I think, initially will not go for the Russian front line, but they will use the F-16 to shoot down Russian fighter jets to make sure absolutely none of them are near the front. They will use the F-16 to bomb more Russian air defense systems. And I think after a few months, the Ukrainians will start to go for Russian positions at the front. Because first, you will want to make sure that there's absolutely no Russian air defense. What the Ukrainians are doing now with ATACMS is destroying the long-range Russian air defense systems, S-300, S-400. But you have shorter systems, like CAP and like Buk and so on. And you will use HARM missiles against those.
To
So the Ukrainians will
blind the radar systems close to the front line. What are the numbers that we may be talking about in terms of the number of aircraft that the Ukraine is going to use, F-16 aircraft? And I'm going to ask you a question about the French jet fighters as well. But what's the number that we are talking about roughly?
Right now, the donations are like 80.
Mm-hmm. Which is quite a significant number. I assume that Poland has like 50 or had initially like 50 of F-16s at the beginning, at the first deal that Poland made. So it's a significant number.
Yes, it's a very good number. Of those 80, you have to take like 10 away that remain in the West for training, and you will have to take 10 away which stay in the West for upgrading and maintenance. And honestly, I think the Ukrainians will have a problem to get pilots for 60 right now, because Soviet planes are completely differently designed than a Western fighter jet. Soviet air doctrine was always we support the army on the ground, and Western air doctrine is different, so the planes are built completely different. So I think even if the Ukrainians get right now 60 F-16, they will maybe have 15 pilots at the beginning. And every 6 months or something, another 10 pilots, 15 pilots will come. Ideally, the Ukrainians will have 60 to 100 pilots at some point. It will take time, because the Ukrainians were like, oh, we can train in 3 months, right? And now we have half a year that they are training, and you're still not done, because at some point the Ukrainians figured out Western airplanes are so more complex with their computers and avionics. The whole concept is so different than the Ukrainian Soviet airplanes that it takes much longer to retrain a pilot from a MiG to a F-16. Then it seems it's even longer than to train someone new, because the French and the British have begun to train Ukrainian young pilot students, and those have already now gone to train for the F-16s, which is faster almost than the training of the Soviet plane pilots. So
is it an issue of the cooperation between different types of weapon systems? Is it the issue of the networking of the aircraft with other weapons and the systems that are being used on the battlefield? Is that the case?
Yeah, Western systems are much more complex, much more capable, have much more options. A Western radar has so many different modes and options. You can even look at the ground and have scan the ground for targets like tanks with a Western airplane radar. The lightning pod, which helps you targeting smart munitions for ground targets. There are various radar emissions systems that measure radar emissions from the ground and help you target those on the F-16s. Countermeasure systems, electronic warfare systems. I mean, a MiG-29 was meant to go up, fly as close as possible to the Western fighter and hopefully shoot it down. That's it. They didn't think more complex in the Soviet Union. It was like, we built 1,000, and if 500 pilots get killed, who cares? Yeah. If the other 500 shoot down a Western plane, we win. Yeah. And that's the concept. And in the West, the whole concept was like, this pilot needs to be protected and safe and have options to defend himself and options to target ground targets, air targets, ship targets, and.
Yeah, and that makes.
And the Ukrainian pilots are now figuring out that they sat in junk planes.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's actually the story. That's the story that actually each post-communist country had to go through, and it took, a long time to realize that this is actually what is needed. Poland is one of the countries. I think it took like 20 years to get finally F-16s instead of those planes. We are now in the process of acquiring also
You should invite a Polish Air Force expert on your show, because he could tell you Poland still has some MiG that were heavily updated with Western technology from Germany and Israel and the United States and Poland. Poland is flying F-16, and you should just ask him how different is to fly an upgraded MiG-29 to an F-16. It's two worlds. It's complete different worlds. The Russians didn't achieve air superiority in Ukraine with these crap planes because they're incapable. Every American Air Force officer will tell you what the Russians did in Ukraine was just, what the fuck? Sorry.
I remember our conversation here with General Deptula, who was one of the creators of the American strategy of the air war, and this is exactly what he told us, that there is a difference in the way of thinking about the strategy of aerial war between Soviet Union and NATO in general, and that makes the whole difference of the things that you are talking about, fundamental differences between the way of thinking, even thinking about the war. Thomas, there is also an issue of the Mirage jet fighters. Why is it important?
Okay, the Mirage has a better radar than the F-16 standard versions the Ukrainians are getting. The Ukrainians and Americans are upgrading right now the F-16s that the Ukrainians are receiving, so they will have a much better radar once they arrive in Ukraine. The Mirage has a very good radar, but it has inferior air-to-air missiles. The American AIM-120 MRAM is a much better missile than the French Mika. But what the French are trying to do is to give Ukrainians this Mirage 2005F to hunt down cruise missiles and drones in Ukrainian airspace. Because those French Mirage are air-to-air fighters. And the French have an immense amount of air-to-air missiles, all the types, that they would like to throw away because they're 40, 50 years old. But you can mount them on this Mirage, and that Mirage can go up. It's supersonic. That means if the Russians send 50 cruise missiles, the Mirage can shoot down 20 to 30 of those, because they can just super cruise towards the missiles and shoot them down, which means you have less stress on the Patriot and NASAMS and IRIS-T systems. It's much, much cheaper, and you can use the F-16 for something different. So this is basically not meant to, because the French Mirage cannot bomb ground targets. These are pure interceptors meant to intercept drones, cruise missiles, planes.
So we are talking about the management of the and the economy in a way of the of the conflict that we are talking about.
Basically, the French are giving the Ukrainians something much better than Yaks because it's much faster, it has much more ammunition, and can be used to protect cities, or it can also be used to protect airfields. Where the F-16s on the airfield, if the Russians fire 30, 40 cruise missiles there, you have to have a Patriot system defending it. But if you have Mirage in the air helping defend it, you use much less Patriot missiles, which then are ready to shoot down other Russian ballistic missiles and so on.
Thomas, my final question, because I'm looking at the clock here in the studio, so we are almost out of time. But there is one more question. Speaking of the modern jet fighters, Russia was famously speaking about their modern, I don't know if it's fifth generation jet fighter. Yeah, okay. But they lost one. They were keeping it away from the front line, but still they lost one. What do we know about it? What is the airplane that we are talking about? And why, again, why is it important? Because this is a story that broke and was published by almost the media in the world.
Russian Sukhoi 57 is just a redesigned Sukhoi 35 in a new clothing. It's still a crap plane with an old radar, an old engine. The Russians say it's fifth generation, but it's just basically it's a pig with lipstick. So it's not really a fifth generation plane. And they don't even, one of the key things of fifth generation is radar absorbent coating. So that radar emissions, this plane swallows, this coating on the plane swallows radar emissions that come towards the plane. And that's why Poland and every country with F-35 has to build hangars to protect the planes from the elements, because this coating needs to be protected. And now you see the Russians just park their stealth planes somewhere in the sun, in the rain, in the snow, and you understand, they don't even have a stealth coating. It's just an old fourth generation plane dressed up a little bit and marketed as fifth generation, and they managed to produce like 10, and they lost already one because they couldn't even build a hangar. And then when you look at the satellite images, you see they don't even put the missiles inside the plane to hide them from radar. They slap it on the outside. So this is a fifth generation plane just in the Russian imagination. It's like everything that the Russians produce, it's old crap dressed up new.
And doesn't work.
Idiots believe the Russian nonsense. But you know what? India was looking at this plane, and then it bought the French Rafale, which is 20 years old, because they figured out the French Rafale is cheaper and much, much better.
And actually works.
So, yeah, the Russians, last thing that I have to say, the Russians sent a few ships to Cuba, and some Americans are in panic. And you know what the Russians had to send? They sent one frigate and a submarine. And they needed to send an oiler with replacements, because this breaks down so often, those ships. They needed to send replacement ship, an oiler with it, and a tug, because sometimes Russian ships break down in the middle of the ocean, and then they need a tug to drag it to the next harbor because it's broken. And people in America are like, oh my God, the Russians sent 4 ships to Cuba.
They didn't send Admiral Kuznetsov?
That doesn't work anymore. The Russians sent 2 ships to Cuba and 2 rescue ships because the other 2 might break down. So the only thing that the Russians are good is massed assaults by meatbags that the Ukrainians shoot down in masses. So the Russians are fighting like in Napoleonic times. Just send a lot of infantry forward and hope it works. Everything else is garbage. But since they have a lot of alcoholics, drunks, idiots, and other garbage, they will never run out of idiots that run in mass assaults against Ukrainian positions. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Technology-wise, the Russians have no technology. They're running out of everything, tanks, airplanes, ships. Everything gets destroyed. The only thing that the Russians have left is idiots that want to go to the front to earn some money and get killed by the Ukrainians in masses.
With a 70% of support of this barbaric war against Ukraine. Thomas, thanks a lot. Again, thanks for your expertise, your time. I know, and our viewers know it very well, war is a serious thing. This is a big tragedy, but keeping an eye on all those aspects that Thomas Theiner is talking about at least sometimes makes us laugh when we hear about the flotilla being sent with a tag.
The thing is, this is tragic for Ukraine and tragic for Europe, but it's tragic comical for the Russian military and defense industry because they're being exposed as clowns.
Yeah, but that's a tragedy of the people that are being killed and targeted by those barbarians. Thomas, thank you very much for your time, your presence on Telewizja Republika. See you soon. Thanks a lot. Stay safe. And we are waiting for your documentaries.
All the best. See you soon. Bye.
Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do want to join us and get our reports on the developments of not only war in Ukraine, you can join us on rachrachon.com. That's the name of our show with .com. You'll find our Substack over there. You'll find links to our YouTube. You can subscribe it. You can send it to your friends. And you can join us on Telewizja Republika. See you soon.